The chlorine scent, usually a harbinger of summer's joy, hung heavy in the air, tinged with the metallic temps of disbelief. My backyard, once a canvas for simple pleasures, Sunday barbecues, the kids' boisterous games of tag, and the quiet satisfaction of a freshly mowed lawn, now felt violated, the locusts of an absurdity so profound it threatened to unravel the very fabric of our suburban peace. It had all started so innocently, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. I, Nathaniel Banks, a man who had known the sting of poverty firsthand, had finally provided a tangible symbol of success for my family, a shimmering cerulean oasis in our otherwise ordinary backyard. The in-ground pool, a source of endless delight for my 3 children, was more than just a recreational amenity. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, a reward for countless double shifts, skipped vacations, and the unwavering belief that a better life was within reach. We weren't wealthy, not by a long shot. Our modest 2-story house, nestled on a neatly manicured street in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood, was a far cry from the sprawling estates that dotted the nearby hills. But we were content. My wife, Sarah, a beacon of warmth and unwavering support, had transformed our house into a home, sanctuary filled with laughter, love, and the aroma of home-cooked meals. Our children, ranging in age from 8 to 12, possessed the boundless energy and unbridled enthusiasm that only children can muster. They were good kids, respectful, kind, and appreciative of the simple blessings in their lives. The pool was their paradise, a place where they could escape the mundane realities of homework and chores, and immerse themselves in a world of splashing, diving, and sun-kissed joy. As a father, watching them revel in their aquatic playground filled me with a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. It was a validation of all the sacrifices I had made, a tangible representation of the American dream realized. One shimmering pool party at a time, our neighborhood, while generally amicable, had its quirks. A collection of families, mostly longtime residents, coexisted in a state of polite indifference. There were the occasional block parties and holiday gatherings, but for the most part, everyone kept to themselves, tending to their own lawns, and guarding their privacy with a quiet intensity, except for Karen. She was the neighborhood outlier, the resident anomaly, a perpetual sour note in our otherwise harmonious suburban symphony. She lived next door, in a house that had been passed down through generations, its paint peeling and its garden overgrown, a stark contrast to the meticulously maintained properties that surrounded it. Karen herself was a study in perpetual discontent, her face perpetually etched with a scowl, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. She was the self-appointed guardian of the street, meticulously monitoring every dog walker, every misplaced garbage can, every child who dared to trespass on her invisible boundary of acceptable behavior. She never smiled, never waved, her demeanor radiating a palpable sense of disapproval. We had tried to be neighborly, offering friendly greetings and extending polite invitations to neighborhood events. But our efforts were always met with cold indifference or outright hostility. We learned to keep our distance, chalking her behavior up to eccentricity or a deep-seated unhappiness that we couldn't comprehend. The idyllic tranquility of that Sunday afternoon, the one that irrevocably altered our perception of suburban bliss, was almost palpable. The sun shone with a radiant warmth, casting shimmering patterns on the surface of the pool. The aroma of grilling burgers mingled with the sweet scent of honeysuckle, creating a sensory tapestry of summertime perfection. I had just finished a grueling double shift, my body aching and my mind weary. But the sight of my children frolicking in the pool washed away the exhaustion, replacing it with a profound sense of contentment. Rock and summertime anthems played softly in the background, providing a mellow soundtrack to the scene. Laughter echoed through the yard, the uninhibited joy of children unburdened by the worries of the adult world. I leaned back in my Adirondack chair, a cold drink in hand, and closed my eyes, allowing myself to be swept away by the moment. It was a rare moment of peace, fleeting glimpse of the happiness I had worked so hard to achieve. The intrusion was jarring. It's an unwelcome disruption to the serenity I had so carefully cultivated. A snapping sound, like a branch breaking underfoot, pierced through the music, followed by the unmistakable screech of metal hinges protesting against forced entry. I opened my eyes, my senses immediately on high alert, and then I saw her. Karen. Not at the fence, not on her porch, not even lurking in the shadows of her overgrown garden. She was inside our yard, stomping across our carefully manicured lawn with the fury of a scorned deity. She had opened our side gate, the one we rarely used, with a force that suggested a deep-seated resentment, and was marching towards the pool. With a singular purpose, her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her face a mask of barely contained rage, her eyes fixed on my children with an intensity that bordered on malevolence. Before I could even process the absurdity of the situation, before I could utter a word of greeting or inquire about the reason for her uninvited presence, she erupted. A torrent of angry words spewed from her mouth, a nonsensical diatribe about injustice, entitlement, and the alleged unfairness of our aquatic paradise. She accused us of flaunting our wealth, of being inconsiderate of her feelings, of somehow depriving her of something that was rightfully hers. She claimed that her house, with its superior sun exposure, was more deserving of a pool, that her needs were greater than ours, that my children were hogging community resources, and that she deserved it more. The sheer audacity of her accusations left me speechless. I tried to reason with her, to politely remind her that this was private property, that the pool was paid for with our hard-earned money, that my children had every right to enjoy it. But my words were like pebbles thrown against a rising tide. Of irrationality, she refused to listen, her eyes blazing with a mixture of envy and righteous indignation. My attempts at calm reasoning only seemed to fuel her rage. She doubled down on her accusations, her voice rising in pitch and volume, attracting the attention of my children, who had stopped playing and were now staring at her with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. I could see the fear creeping into their eyes, the innocent joy of a summer afternoon replaced by the unsettling realization that something was terribly wrong. I felt a surge of protective anger bubbling within me, a primal instinct to shield my children from this unhinged individual who had invaded our sanctuary. But I knew that escalating the situation would only make things worse. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure, and firmly but calmly told her to leave our property. Her response was as predictable as it was appalling. She stormed out of the yard, her movements jerky and exaggerated, her face contorted in a parody of outraged indignation. She pulled out her cell phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen with a manic energy, and proceeded to dial 911, her voice booming across the yard, designed for maximum dramatic effect. She told the dispatcher in a voice dripping with self-importance and victimhood that there were unsupervised children in a neighborhood pool that wasn't hers, that they were creating a disturbance, and that she feared for their safety. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical, were it not for the fact that she was involving law enforcement in her petty, irrational vendetta. I knew that the police would likely dismiss her complaint as frivolous, but the thought of my children being subjected to the scrutiny of law enforcement simply for enjoying their own backyard pool filled me with a cold dread. Within 15 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived, their flashing lights casting an unsettling glow over our otherwise peaceful street. The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from their houses, their faces etched with curiosity and concern. I met the officers at the curb, my heart pounding in my chest, and calmly explained the situation, trying to paint a picture of Karen's history of eccentric behavior and her current irrational outburst. I offered to show them receipts, installation, invoices, photos of the pool, even the property deed, anything to prove that we were not violating any laws or ordinances. One of the officers, a young, clean-cut man with a patient demeanor, nodded understandingly. He confessed that he recognized Karen's name from previous false alarm calls, a fact that did little to alleviate my anxiety as I spoke with the officers. Karen, fueled by the attention and the potential for drama, marched over to the curb, clutching a thick folder of papers to her chest. She launched into another tirade, this time directed at the officers, spouting nonsensical legal jargon about historic land usage and verbal easements from decades ago. lease. She claimed that the pool should have been hers, that her family had always envisioned a pool on that particular plot of land, and that it was simply not fair that those kids got to enjoy something she had wanted since she was a teenager. Her words were a jumbled mess of entitlement, envy, and delusion, a window into a mind consumed by bitterness and resentment. At this point, I just wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I cannot believe she's bringing this to the police. The officers, to their credit, remained remarkably composed in the face of Karen's escalating lunacy. They listened patiently, interjecting occasionally with questions, attempting to decipher the twisted logic behind her claims. They politely, but firmly informed her that the pool was located on private property, that the land belonged to us, and that she had no legal right to demand access to it. They warned her that continued harassment of my family could result in legal action, including a restraining order. For a brief moment, it seemed as if their words had penetrated her delusional bubble. She fell silent, her shoulders slumping slightly, her eyes losing some of their manic intensity. But the reprieve was short-lived. The frustration of being thwarted, the realization that her carefully constructed narrative of victimhood was crumbling. Before her eyes seemed to ignite a fresh wave of rage. She glared at the officers, her eyes narrowed with resentment, and accused them of being biased, of siding with those people simply because they had a fancy pool. She ranted about the injustice of the world, the unfairness of life, the inherent advantage of those who possessed material wealth. The officers, clearly growing weary of her antics, reiterated their warning and instructed her to return to her property. It should have ended there. The officers had done their job. Karen had been warned, and the neighborhood could return to its uneasy state of equilibrium. But Karen's descent into madness was far from over. In a moment that defied all logic and reason, she crossed the line. Literally, she shoved one of the officers, a full-on two-handed shove delivered with surprising force directly into the chest of a uniformed police officer. The officer, taken aback by the sudden assault, stumbled slightly, but quickly regained his balance. The other officer, witnessing the blatant act of aggression, immediately reached for his taser. The air crackled with tension. The quiet suburban street suddenly transformed into a potential battleground. But Karen wasn't finished. Emboldened by her act of defiance, fueled by a cocktail of desperation and delusion, she attempted to jump back into our yard, screaming that she was taking a citizen's swim before the pool was ruined by more kids. In her frenzied attempt to breach our property line, she slipped on the wet grass near the edge of the pool, her feet flying out from under her. She flailed wildly, her arms windmilling in a desperate attempt to regain her balance, but it was to no avail. She crashed into the shallow end of the pool, hitting the inflatable floaty in a cloud of spray and outraged shrieks. The scene that unfolded was a surreal blend of slapstick comedy and abject tragedy. There was Karen, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, sputtering and coughing in the shallow end of the pool. She continued to scream, her voice hoarse and shrill, denouncing us, the police, and the general injustice of the universe. The inflatable floaty, a garish pink flamingo, bobbed comically beside her, bearing silent witness to her unraveling. The officers, after a moment of stunned silence, sprang into action. They waded into the pool, their uniforms quickly becoming saturated, and attempted to extract Karen from her watery prison. But she resisted, thrashing and kicking, clinging to the sides of the pool like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. She continued to rant, her words now slurred and incoherent, accusing us of plotting against her, of brainwashing the neighborhood, of stealing her rightful inheritance. It took both officers to subdue her, to pry her hands from the slippery coping stones and drag her, kicking and screaming, out of the pool. They wrestled her onto the lawn, struggling to handcuff her as she continued to resist, her body slick with water and her mind lost in a fog of delusion. The neighbors, who had been watching the spectacle from their yards with a mixture of morbid curiosity and horrified fascination, and began to murmur amongst themselves. Cell phone cameras emerged, capturing every moment of Karen's public meltdown.
Ow.
The scene was becoming a viral sensation in real time. a testament to the power of social media to amplify even the most bizarre and embarrassing moments of suburban life. Finally, the officers managed to secure the handcuffs, their faces grim and determined. They wrapped Karen in one of my old pool towels, a gesture of unexpected kindness amidst the chaos, and helped her to her feet, even in handcuffs, soaking. Wet and wrapped in a faded, chlorine-stained towel, Karen refused to relinquish her victim narrative. She continued to cry, her voice now laced with desperation, lamenting the loss of her son rights and her moral ownership of the pool. She insisted that she was the injured party, the victim of a vast conspiracy orchestrated by my family and the rest of the neighborhood. As the officers led her towards the patrol car, her voice echoing through the quiet street, she made one final, desperate plea. "They're ruining my life. They're ruining my life." As the patrol car doors slammed shut, the sound echoing eerily. In the sudden silence, a collective sigh of relief swept through the neighborhood. The neighbors, emboldened by the removal of the source of their collective anxiety, began to tentatively approach, offering words of support and commiseration. I managed a weak smile, my mind still reeling from the absurdity of the events that had just unfolded. My children, who had been huddled together in the corner of the yard, their faces pale with fear, slowly began to emerge, their eyes wide with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. The aftermath was almost as surreal as the event itself. One of the officers, while conducting a routine search of Karen's belongings, discovered a laminated photograph of our pool in her folder. It was a high-quality image, taken from a distance, meticulously capturing every detail of our aquatic oasis. Scribbled in the margins were handwritten measurements, calculations of surface area, and cryptic notes about sunlight angles and water volume. It was clear that Karen had been obsessively studying our pool, plotting against us, consumed by a desire to possess what was rightfully ours. He also had a file detailing all of her false compliant calls, trespassing warnings, and much more. This was a troubled human being. The discovery of the photograph was the final piece of the puzzle, a confirmation of Karen's deep-seated obsession and her descent into irrationality. It was both disturbing and strangely validating. A validation of our long-held suspicion that she was not simply eccentric, but genuinely unwell. As the officers prepared to leave, the lead officer turned to me, his expression a mixture of sympathy and amusement. "I think you'll have some peace and quiet now, Mr. Banks," he said with a wry smile. "But I wouldn't be surprised if you hear from her lawyer." I watched as the patrol cars pulled away, their taillights disappearing into the distance, leaving behind a sense of profound exhaustion. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across our yard, transforming our once idyllic backyard into a landscape of lingering unease. I knew that the events of that day would forever alter our perception of suburban life, shattering the illusion of tranquility and exposing the hidden darkness that lurked beneath the surface. But I also knew that we had survived, that we had faced the storm and emerged, battered but unbroken. I turned to my children, their faces still etched with anxiety, and offered them popsicles, a small token of comfort amidst the chaos. I turned the music back up, filling the air with the familiar sounds of summer, resumed grilling the burgers, determined to salvage what was left of our Sunday afternoon. Even Karen's soggy dreams disappeared into the back seat of a cruiser. This wasn't over. I just knew it. But for the moment, peace reigned, at least in my backyard.